Well, I would like to give a very big welcome to all guests today, and who I see from the registrations come from all over the world, and to our panelists who we are thrilled to have with us. This year is the 50th anniversary of the Berghof Foundation, and we work to analyze and reduce violent conflict in many parts of the world, very much including in the region we are here to talk about today. And to mark this anniversary, we are holding a number of events, inviting exceptional individuals to talk to us and take questions on a wide variety of topics. And today we have great panelists to discuss the topic of peaceful protests, with particular reference to current protest movements in Lebanon, Iraq, and Sudan. But before we get to that point, in about 25 minutes' time, it is my huge honor, actually the word honor doesn't do it justice, to have Lakhdar Brahimi with us. With no shadow of hyperbole, Mr. Brahimi is, for me and for many others, probably the most brilliant and important international mediator of our time. He joined the Front de Libération Nationale, the movement that achieved independence for Algeria in 1956, in his early 20s. He had a very distinguished Algerian career, culminating in being foreign minister. And he was one of the top officials in the Arab League. And in that capacity, he negotiated the Taif Accords that led to an end of the civil war in Lebanon in 1989. And then for much of the next 25 years, he was basically the go-to person at the UN for 3 successive secretary generals, serving in too many places to mention, but most notably playing a historic role in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. And in the last position, he was the joint UN and Arab League Special Envoy for Syria following the Arab Uprising until 2014. Given all this, there's probably nobody in the entire world more qualified to give a first-hand historical perspective of Arab protest movements. It will have escaped nobody's attention that we are currently witnessing a protest movement in Palestine, a movement that was provoked by decades of occupation and eviction, most recently in East Jerusalem. But then this movement's largely peaceful campaign was in effect hijacked by Hamas, which inexcusably started firing rockets at Israel, thereby enabling many in the world to forget what had been happening in the West Bank just a few days before, and which then led to, in my view, a wildly disproportionate reaction by the Israelis, leading to many deaths, including dozens of children. Although I expect that almost everyone attending this meeting will feel various levels of outrage over what's happening, we are very keen for this meeting today to stick to the topic that we had planned for it, and not to focus on Gaza, although of course we can't avoid it altogether. So, Mr. Brahimi, you have a long and unique historical perspective of protest movements in the Arab world, including your own country, going back nearly 70 years. And would you care to share with us any particular perspectives or insights that you might have on this topic? For this question, I was hoping to go back to the years before 2011, and we would come back to the Arab Uprising in a minute or so.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew, for inviting me. It's an honor and a pleasure, a particular pleasure to see you in your new capacity as the chair of this organization. And I wish you as much success in your new career as you had in your first one. You know, I think to be a little bit fast, I will take you straight to Nasser and the Ba'ath Party. In the very early 50s, these were, in the eastern part of the Arab world, the 2 players that dominated the scene, including the protest scene. In the Maghreb, the part where I come from, that period was still a period of national liberation from colonial rule. in the eastern part of the world, and including in the three countries you want to concentrate on today. The three big titles that were discussed were freedom, unity, and socialism. And depending on which order you put them, then you would be closer to Nasser or closer to the Ba'ath. For Nasser, it was freedom first, unity second, and socialism third. But for the Ba'ath party, it was no. It was unity first of all. You have got to realize the Arab unity, and then it will be easy to do the rest. Nasser would say that, you know, we are divided. This is a fact. Let's achieve our freedom from external control, and then, you know, it will be easier to work for freedom and socialism. So whether the Ba'ath and then Nasser cooperated, or on the contrary, for much of the period were opposed to one another, I think the Arab world had a lot of problems. And I mean, I don't know whether we can call it protest movement. There's one feature that is completely different from what we have now. The army was considered as a very positive element who could achieve all three objectives: freedom, unity, and socialism. I think now things have changed completely. The army is rather on the other side. The army is preventing freedom, it's preventing everything else. The other difference is that you know, the protest movement, the political movements that existed, did not really pay a great deal of attention to social and economic problems. Freedom and unity were really of paramount importance. And then I don't think, you know, big demonstrations were held. They weren't meant to achieve power. They were meant to push the government to move in the direction which you want them to move. Now, I think that people are practically fed up with every single government in the region, and that the prelude to any progress starts with changing the regime. In February, end of February 2011, I said that everybody in the world, in the Arab world, want change. If the governments want to lead that change, they can. If they don't, they will be its victims. I'm tempted to say now that perhaps you know, victims is more important than leader. And that is what is happening. People are totally discouraged, totally disillusioned. They have lost faith and respect for their governments.
No, thank you so much. It's a huge question, and you gave a very concise answer. But Ms. Brahimi, this is, of course, is the 10th anniversary of the Arab Awakening, and I was wondering what similarities you might see between then and what we see now, particularly maybe with reference to the three countries that we are discussing.
You know, I think that the main difference is what I have just said about the fact that you know, people wanted things in the earlier period, but they thought that their governments, they were protesting that their governments were not leading them, were not proving them enough leadership. So they were trying to push their governments to provide that lead and bring that change on. Now that has been completely gone. I mean, you see, we have tried everything. We have tried democratic governments immediately after independence from the British and from the French. We pretended to have political parties and elections and so on. That didn't work. We tried single parties and socialist aspirations. That did not work. And also the world around us was changing. The Soviet Union all but disappeared and accepted its defeat and the defeat of socialism. So what was, and also, the Americans, whose leadership has been, enthusiastically or reluctantly accepted, were saying that there is only one way to go. It's the end of history. It is liberalism. It's not only capitalism. It's extreme liberalism. And I think that all in all, people are working within that framework. We again thought that some of the regimes or most of the regimes were extremely strong. As a matter of fact, they had done everything to be strong. In Tunisia, where the army is very small and never had any pretension to play a political role, this police, on the contrary, was a very, very well-equipped body. So nobody thought that the Tunisian police would be defeated by a spontaneous demonstration starting in a small town inside the country nobody had ever heard of. Nobody thought of that. Not the Tunisians and not the rest of the Arab world, and definitely not the rest of the world and the big powers. Yeah, there has always been small things taking place, but the Tunisian police has been able to deal with that with no problem. And all of a sudden you see that this mighty system of President Ben Ali has fallen in 3 weeks. 3 weeks, no, not more than that. Egypt, again, the regime of President Mubarak reinforced the police almost as much as the army. They had a big army, a well-trained army, but their police was acquiring tanks, planes, helicopters. So, yeah, all right, what happened in Tunisia is surprising, but surely, Mubarak will deal with this. Mubarak, his police, his army will deal with the situation. They didn't. Again, they didn't last a month. So then, things, common sense became, all these regimes are going to fall. So when things moved to Syria, if Ben Ali and Mubarak have lasted less than a month, how long will Bashar al-Assad last? Yeah, maybe 1 month, maybe 2 months, maybe 3, but not much more. Only Russia had another analysis. I said Syria is different. The regime will not fall the way it has fallen in Tunisia and Egypt. So, but you see, what we know now is that spontaneous demonstrations, like what happened in Tunisia and Egypt and beginning in Syria, have no leadership. And when they win, they don't know what to do with their victory. So in Tunisia and Egypt, the people who really hijacked victory to their profit were the people who were organized. That's the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood in Syria was not, has been fought very effectively by the father of Bashar al-Assad. And they were not strong enough to. Besides that, I think that I was going to say that the regimes in Tunisia and Egypt were ready to accept defeat. The regime in Syria was not ready to accept defeat. And they found immediately very strong allies in Russia and Iran. This is, now in Sudan, later, the movement was not spontaneous. It was started by an alliance that was built as they went along, that included political parties, trade unions, and civil society, including women. And what they did was make a deal with the army. The army got rid of President Bashir and his government for them, and they made a deal, and that deal seems to be working. Seems to be working for them. In Iraq, it's another story. Iraq was invaded by the United States with the United Kingdom as a junior but effective and important partner. That is the important background for Iraq. And what I'm sure you must have heard me say this. The Americans, I think the British wouldn't have done that if they had the major say. They handed over Iraq on a gold plate to Iran. And now they seem to be saying to Iran, can you please hand back Iraq to us? And they're very surprised that Iran say no. But what is happening, the popular street protest is taking place against the successor regime to the regime of Saddam, who was brought down by the American invasion. They are, and subsidiarily also against Iran. So it's a very interesting situation. But all in all, these leaderless, spontaneous movement in some countries, the American brutal intervention in Iran have broken the Arab world to pieces. And this is what we are seeing, and it is against this background of total weakness and division of the Arab world that the Palestinians are facing yet one another onslaught by the Israelis.
Indeed. We have been at Berghof, but elsewhere, trying to work on the idea of sort of peaceful protest movements. But that is can often be a very context-specific phenomenon. I mean, in your country, if the FLN had pursued a peaceful path, I mean, would that have worked? I mean, if Gandhi had been an Algerian, would he have had a chance against General Massoud, for example? To use another case, I mean, during the second Intifada, from 2000, 2003, when I was working for the United Nations in the West Bank and Gaza, I was personally strongly warned off by the Israelis who complained bitterly to my boss when they heard about it, from encouraging Palestinians to pursue the path of non-violence. It is clear that some governments actively want their opponents not to be attractive, peaceful protesters, but to be terrorists. And hence, there's often a strong incentive for governments to ensure that they don't face non-violent protests. You just mentioned Sudan not being spontaneous last year, or 2 years ago, but it was largely nonviolent. Do you see any future for peaceful protest movements in the Arab world?
In Palestine, most certainly. But since you have mentioned Algeria, let me say that we did the equivalent of our protest movement in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. By the 1950s, our political parties were exhausted and divided. The FLN was born from that failure and those divisions. The FLN is a handful of very young individuals who made the bet that if you start a war of liberation, and it was almost amusing to call it a war of liberation in 1954. But if you started, one of them said, Arab said, throw the revolution in the streets, people will pick it up. And their bet was right. The cost was enormous, but they have won their bet and obtained what they wanted, liberation and independence. In Palestine, yes, there is no Gandhi anywhere in the Arab world, and unfortunately not in. But there is some people who are trying to do what Gandhi did, and that's BDS. What Gandhi did is, in addition to the fact that say, peaceful. What he did was boycott Britain, and that cost Britain and united the people of India more around Nehru than around Gandhi. People were united against the leadership of Nehru, who wanted independence and self-rule from Britain. BDS, I'm not surprised at all that the Israelis told you, please don't encourage them to be non-violent, because violence in Palestine is against Israel. It's not possible. There are too few, the territory is too small, and Israel is not only too strong, but also ruthless. They will stop at nothing to destroy opposition. But peaceful activities are more difficult to combat for them. And what you see happening now is that the Israelis are probably more afraid of this small BDS movement than of anything else the Palestinians are throwing at them. And certainly much more than the missiles of Hamas. But let me defend Hamas a little bit. Everybody is speaking now about the fact that Hamas are throwing these rockets, locally produced rockets. Nobody is paying attention to the fact that Hamas has warned Israel several times in the past few weeks before throwing the first rocket that what is happening in Jerusalem and what is happening in the West Bank and what is happening in Gaza is unacceptable. And we are not going to take it lying down. Cleverly, the Israelis have exploited the fact that the rockets of Hamas are so ineffectual, as a matter of fact. That's what they are exploiting. And also, of course, they are very, very capable of working out their messages to the rest of the world. The crisis today started with the rockets that Hamas has fired. No, it hasn't started. I think, as you mentioned yourself, The problem that needs to be solved if we want peace in historic Palestine is occupation. As long as occupation is not ended, then there will be 1,000 reasons for crisis like this to erupt, including Hamas throwing three rockets or 100 rockets of the kind they possess. Nothing comparable to the bombardments by the powerful Israeli army.
To change the topic a little bit, 13 years ago, you wrote a very short but important paper entitled The 7 Deadly Sins of Mediation, which I recommend to anyone interested in the topic. I won't list all 7 of those deadly sins, but just one: arrogance. Now, I once had the incredible privilege as a young UN officer to accompany you on your first ever trip to Afghanistan and 14 other countries in 1997. And I must say that the most striking thing about observing you then, and I must say over the next 15 years, was how remarkably non-arrogant you appeared to various interlocutors and how this had a positive impact. Because I think some people have an impression that successful mediation is about following the Richard Holbrooke school, using his large physical presence, loud voice, bullying tactics, and the threats of deploying the United States Air Force to basically force the parties to agree to a peace deal. You were always the opposite of that, while making it very clear to even the most thuggish warlord that you were not going to be bullied either. Do you have anything to say about any of those 7 deadly sins now, particularly in the context of dealing with protest movements?
Yeah, I'm glad you have mentioned this paper that I wrote together with Salman Ahmed. And, we thought first to put it in a positive form instead of arrogance, humility. But Salman had this idea of putting it in that it's more sexy. People are more interested by sin than by virtue. There is two fundamental sins. One is arrogance, and the other one, which is very much associated with it all the time, is ignorance. These are the two things that will not allow you to make any progress. Knowledge is, as a matter of fact, there must be some better word for that. Ignorance is better. When you go to a place that has been in conflict or is about to enter conflict, you can be absolutely certain that you know extremely little about that place. No matter how much you have read, no matter how much you think you know the country. Lebanon, I knew Lebanon. I have been there, tens of times. I have countless friends. Same thing with Iraq, same thing with Syria. But what you discover is that you know extremely little. And when you leave, if you are sincere and serious, you will know that you still don't know enough about the place where you have tried to work successfully or not, and you have already left. This is absolutely vital. Hence, the necessity of going there with humility. Yes, I am trying to help. I'm coming to help. I am, sent by, kings and presidents and the Security Council of the United Nations. But still, you, the people of that country, know much better than I do. And also, you see this, the arrogance of condemning out of hand this or that to those parties. It's not an easy decision for somebody to take arms and kill their neighbors. So you can at least ask them, why did you do that? So, deciding that, you can't talk to the Taliban because, you are angry at them, you don't, condemn what they do in practically everything. But if you are interested in Afghanistan, you've got to listen to them. Yeah. So listen to everybody. Respect everybody, and then see what you can do. I discovered in Iraq that actually I didn't know anything about Iraq. I had visited another Iraq. Iraq has changed, had already changed when I went there in 2004, and not only because of the invasion, just completely changed. My friends were in their 70s and 80s and 90s, dealing with the country that 70% of the population is under 35. So same thing in Syria. I didn't see many of the people I knew in Syria that I know extremely well because they were dead, because they were retired, because they were pushed aside. So these 7 sins are very important to start with before you even begin your work. You've got to, and in particular, this issue of ignorance. Learn as much as you learn, and you learn a whole of a great deal by listening to people of all ages, all persuasions, men and women. In Iraq, as a matter of fact, we didn't do anything else because we were powerless. I mean, just give a chance to people to talk. And I went once with 2 other ambassadors, or rather 2 ambassadors. I was not ambassador, from Sweden and Argentina to Iraq. All we did was listen to the Iraqi government. The Iraqi government in those days, after the Kuwait and liberation of Kuwait, was not allowed to go to the Security Council when the Iraqi question was discussed. So they were so happy that somebody from the United Nations has sat and listened to them and reported to the Security Council. This is what the Iraqis are saying. This is what they are thinking. This is. These are very, very important, very important things.
Indeed, thank you. My last question to you before we hand to the panel. Your mediation roles were always carried out representing either or both the Arab League and the United Nations. So it was always very official, very track one, as they say. I'd love to hear how you see the role of organizations such as Berghof or HD or EIP or CMI that are non-official, but are generously funded by friendly governments like the Germans, the Nordics, and the Swiss. How can organizations such as ours be helpful to the overall peace effort? And perhaps just as important, as in the same way as you framed your study in the negative, what should we be careful not to do to undermine other efforts?
First of all, there are too many of you. So you can't speak of in this kind of NGOs in general. But let me speak. I prefer to do from practical situations. Martin Griffith in 1998 was at the United Nations, the deputy in OCHA, number 2 in OCHA. And all of a sudden he gave it up. And by chance, I ran into him in Indonesia, where I was there privately. He came to see the president of Indonesia to talk about Aceh. the northern province in Sumatra, where there was a rebellion against the central government, very, old rebellion. Nobody was interested in Aceh. And he took that and carried it alone for quite some time. And then he succeeded to bring, thanks to the tsunami, as a matter of fact. The tsunami helped him bring the Achenese rebels and the Indonesian government together. He gave it to Kofi Annan. Kofi Annan gave it to Matti Ahtisaari, former president of Finland. Ahtisaari brought the two parties to Helsinki for 15 days. They made an agreement, and he got a Nobel Prize for that. I think that Martin should have reclaimed, to share that Nobel Prize. So this is something absolutely in your field of activity and interest. The UN has about 16, I think, the last count I had, a couple of years, missions. But Angela Merkel in Paris 4 years ago, said that there were 120 conflicts in the world. So there are many conflicts that are not, of interest to anybody. Places like that are really meant for you, are meant for organizations like that is one. Second, again, another example. Kofi Annan, when he was asked to go to Kenya after that election that provoked a lot of incidents, a lot of killings. He used HD and others extremely well, because organizations like yours, when they are serious, extremely well organized, they can do a lot of things the United Nations cannot do. But they work very closely with him. As a matter of fact, they worked for him. And that cooperation was extremely, extremely constructive, and it helped Kofi achieve success. But if these organizations go unbridled and do their own thing without even talking to the track one people, that's to be avoided.
Well, Ms. Brahimi, thank you so much for that. Wonderful insights. And I'm now going to hand over to my friend and colleague Ramzi, who is moderating our panel. I just want to inform all our guests that Mr. Brahimi has very kindly agreed to, he and I are no longer going to be part of this, but coming back in about an hour and 10 minutes, he very kindly agreed to answer questions that might be put to him and to make any comments that he cares to make regarding the rest of this afternoon. Over to you, Ramzi.
Thank you, Andrew. I would like to welcome you all again to this session on protest movements in the Arab world. It's a great pleasure for me to moderate this panel discussion. The debate around what we should call the uprising that intensified 10 years ago in various Middle Eastern and North African countries is still ongoing. Is it an Arab Spring or an Arab Autumn? Actually, the loss between spring and autumn goes far beyond the climate change, and it reflects instead the course of development in the respective societies and countries. I assume that many protesters agrees that the uprisings were not only about the Arabs, but also about social justice for all citizens. The uprisings were not abrupt, maybe sometimes spontaneous, but they were another round of nonviolent resistance. So a continuation of decades of, many decades of struggles and aspirations for change, actually system change. Perhaps the words of philosopher Heraclitus, there is nothing permanent except change, resonates with most of us. Still, we all have experienced how difficult, maybe sometimes also almost impossible, it is to change or reform a system, even weak, protracted systems or regime. We also heard from Mr. Ibrahimi how many years of struggles it took to change or to free Algeria. It's also true that having a moral legitimate cause is not enough for people in power to compromise and let go of their massive privileges and power. And usually these moral causes are repressed, and by brutal regimes will try to get rid of them in all ways. Some people respond in violence to achieve the desired change, and that's how we see it in different countries. However, some other people decide to respond in a non-violent way and use non-violent tactics, despite the challenges, threats, and disappointment that might entail such approach. Today, we will focus about these kind of tactics. We will focus about the recent developments in Lebanon, Sudan, and Iraq. Millions of people went to the street demonstrating against corruption, social injustice, and demanding positive and sustainable social and systematic change. And for this to discuss more in details, it is my great pleasure to host my fellow panelists in what I hope to be an insightful discussion on the opportunities, challenges, and prospects for the protest movements in Iraq, Lebanon, and Sudan. Before we start, a few words about the format of this panel, which comprise two main segments. First, we will hear an introductory conversation from each panelist, whom I will introduce in turn when giving them the floor. And second, we will have a kind of Q&A session in which we will try to dive deeper in each of the three contexts. Again, Iraq, Lebanon, and Sudan. For this, we really welcome all your questions. As you read in the chat, you can send us your question either through the Q&A option or at the email of the event, or you can also on Twitter follow the hashtag Berghof50. If you have a question to Mr. Ibrahimi or to our panelists, please feel free. Last comment, this session is being recorded for possible usage on the Berghof social media channels. Also, after this, we will close, as my CEO, Andrew, said, with a final remarks from him and Mr. Ibrahimi. First, I will start. Let me begin by introducing my colleague, Dr. Véronique Doudet. She's a senior advisor at the Berghof Foundation, where she coordinated various collaborative research projects on several topics, including protest movements and civil resistance. Véronique, let me ask you from a conflict perspective, from a conflict transformation perspective, and also after hearing the experience of Mr. Ibrahimi, what are the main lessons learned from the 2011 uprisings? And what do they mean for the recent and ongoing movement in the region?
Many thanks, Ramzi. And it's a privilege and an honor to kick off this panel discussion in such great company with three highly committed activists. And it's very humbling to be speaking after Mr. Ibrahimi, indeed. I'm the odd one out on this panel since I'm actually not from the Middle East, but I've been asked to reflect on the roles of protest movements from a conflict transformation perspective, in particular offering a few lessons learned from the 2011 Arab Uprisings for the recent and ongoing movements in the region. So I would say that from a conflict transformation perspective on protest movements, this invites us to think about the following questions. Firstly, how do grassroots mass movements, also called people power movements, that are rooted in long-standing popular grievances and structural inequality help to shift power in society towards greater social justice, freedom, human rights, and democracy, or towards sustaining peace? Secondly, how do they manage to sustain their commitment to non-violence and to avoid spirals of polarization, hatred, violence, and destruction? Also, how do they sustain mobilization until their demands are met through a new political settlement? And how do they engage during transitions by participating meaningfully in dialogue and negotiation with traditional parties and with old elites, or by influencing decision-making processes through sustained pressure from the street? And finally, how can peace-building organizations, such as my own organization, the Berghof Foundation, support those processes by engaging constructively with protest movements during uprisings and throughout prolonged transitions? I would say that since the beginning of this year, a lot of discussions have taken place at the occasion of the 10th anniversary of the Arab Spring. And what I've heard and read largely echoes some of my own research, including a forthcoming study with the United States Institute of Peace, for which I interviewed former youth activists and civil society leaders from Tunisia and Egypt to try and elicit their critical self-reflections on the role of dialogue and negotiation during the revolution and during the subsequent political transitions in 2011 to 2013. Allow me to share some brief reflections from those observations, which I hope will inspire the subsequent panel discussion on ongoing dynamics in Sudan, Lebanon, and Iraq. So a general observation, which is aligned with the broader theory on democratic transitions and social movements, is that on the one hand, the social upheavals that are brought about by popular uprising led by revolutionary youth and often with young women at the forefront, when successful, these open a political space for change at the top through the toppling down of a dictator or through constitutional reform, for instance. But that space is quickly closed again as old and new elites or counter elites take over the transition, negotiate the rules of the game, and prevent a complete transformation of the system, and especially of the socioeconomic system. This transition is still ongoing in Tunisia, but it was abruptly interrupted in Egypt with the return of the military regime. In my research, I have identified a few influential factors that either support or inhibit the capacity of protest movements to become and to remain key agents of change and conflict transformation. So in the few minutes that I have, let me briefly list those factors before giving the floor to the lived experiences of my co-panelists to hear how they are playing out in ongoing struggles in the region. So the first one briefly has to do with the whole issues around leadership, representation, coalition building, and managing unity in diversity. As we've already heard from Mr. Brahimi, protest movements are usually made up of informal networks organized horizontally with loose membership, fluid structures, and diffuse leadership. And we've seen that both in Egypt and in Tunisia, where heterogeneous opposition coalitions, which were rallying behind protests, did not manage to agree on a common program, but also could not identify consensual individuals who could represent the coalition in all its diversity. But for protest movements to be able to effectively influence decision-making processes during the transition, they need to identify credible, legitimate, and representative leaders. Secondly, I would say that it's very important for protest movements to remain firmly committed to nonviolent discipline, to be able to have the capacity to de-escalate tensions and to establish and nurture a culture of dialogue and a culture of nonviolence, especially in the face of acute security challenges, including repression by the state, but also radicalization from within. And I would like to maybe briefly point to the example of Tunisia, where I think the National Dialogue Conference, which was organized in 2013 and 14, helped to break the political deadlock, but also break the spiral of violence as the country was on the brink of civil war. It's also very important for movements to prepare realistic policy options, formulate pragmatic negotiation positions, and switch from radical opposition to alternative vision of society and of a political program. Activists are often opposed to the idea of formulating compromises. Their position is, we go all the way to the end, we cripple the system, and then we see what happens, which is very understandable given the system's from which they emerge. But I would say that this skepticism towards dialogue with the enemy leads to serious challenges when it comes to turning their hardly fought gains into long-term political change, especially when they face highly experienced and expert elites that then shape the transitional processes in their own terms. Briefly, the last two factors would be, on the one hand, a very difficult balance to be found between, on the one hand, movements managing to institutionalize and to prepare for participation in politics, while at the same time maintaining their capacity to put nonviolent pressure from the street, including after the transition, to make sure that the oppressive systems will be dismantled and that real perspectives will be offered for citizens. And finally, I've talked too much about movements and I would have a lot to say about other actors, but I would maybe like to finish by pointing to the responsibilities of international actors, including mediation organizations, their failures to actually treat protest movements as conflict parties in their own right, because they approach those conflicts with a civil war mentality, I would say. And so they would be looking for either the guys with the guns or the institutional actors, the established parties that they will assume speak for protest movements, even though that's often very much not the case. And also the tendency of coming in much too late when violence erupts. So I'll stop here, and I really hope to hear more, maybe hopeful insights about how activists in Sudan, in Iraq, and in Lebanon are learning some of those lessons and are managing these challenges in their own ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Vero, and thanks for simplifying this very complex reality of the challenges that every nonviolent protest movement can face. Now we will turn to Iraq, where I'm glad to welcome Hannah Edward, who joined us from Baghdad. For the last 50 years, Hannah has been a human rights, women's rights, and democracy defender. She is the co-founder of both the Iraqi Women Network and the Amal Association, where she is also the chair. Hannah, you have led countless of local, regional, international campaigns for gender equality, social justice, and peace. You've lived many regimes and systems in Iraq and in the region. Despite all the challenges, you remain cautiously optimistic. And I'm really amazed by your positiveness that you bring in every time you speak. What roles the protest movement are playing in Iraq right now, and which key factors presented by Veronique right now can be, you think, a driver for change in Iraq? I was expecting this. I think you have to open your microphone. Maybe someone from the communication team can help us, if that's possible. Thank you. Probably that's happening with everyone in the last year due to the pandemic.
Sorry.
We can.
I am so honored and pleased to be in this, with Berghof, in this panel, and to meet you. And especially, I am so pleased to meet with Lakhdar Ibrahimi. We knew him from his visit to Iraq several times and discussed with him the change that it was after 2003. And also to be also with Mr. Andrew Climore, where he was in Baghdad also, and in UNAMI, which I feel so honored also to meet other friends or other guests in this panel. I would like to speak that today, when listening to all now, that's about our situation now, after I can speak about after 18 years, from change in 2003, where this change was really invaded by US and with other international allies, and which has really made this the new regime with speaking about democracy, with speaking about elections. We do have such a lot of changing, but it wasn't really in real or genuine way of making the difference in our situation. We had really big dream when we spoke about the toppling of Saddam Hussein regime. But what happened after that? It has really made I can speak about a new regime with a new, I would say, very, not, how you say it, trying not to build a country based, or to build a system based on citizenship. It was built on, in contrary, it was built on certain, how you say, certain concept which has made a very blow to our situation. When we speak about proportion system based on ethnicities, based on sectarianism, based on, how we say it, discrimination among people, due to their, how we say it, as I said, not only ethnicity, when they have divided us into Kurds, Arabs, Kurds, Sunni, Shia, and so on. That was really very, very harm for the new regime to be in this country. And after, when we have gone through difficult and bitter times through this 18 years, where we have seen, how we say it, civic wars, based on sectarianism, when we made also with the terrorists, we defined with Daesh, with ISIS, we defined with so many challenges that has affected us, or it has, endangered uh, our independence and endanger the security of our country. It's not only that, but it has really, we lose our security as peoples. We lose our aspiration for change, for the how you say it, interest of our people. Now, after 18 years, a new generation has been grown up, and the new generation who has been away from the Ba'ath Party or from the Saddam Hussein time. And a new generation has faced with, sectarianism, with the dangers of sectarianism, with dangers of splitting people according to their ethnicities, and splitting peoples according to their loyal or tribals, or to their, how you say it, religious. This is with the new development in the region, as when Al-Akhdar Ibrahimi spoke about, Arab Spring or others, the movement, that was, we were a civil society, always been involved in this, in the different activities, especially in a new awareness, bringing a new awareness to the new generation, bringing new activities, a new program based on citizenship, based on diversity, based on accepting the others, based on the, how you say it, different, the peaceful coexistence among people. It was a new ideas in our region, in our country, and it wasn't easy. As I said, that's the bitter time that we have gone through, especially during the sectarianism time after 2005 and until 2009. Then we faced with the Daesh from 2014 until 2017, end of 2017. It was for us too much, and we faced with splitting the country. We faced with many interventions from the regional and international interventions in our security or in our sovereignty, against our sovereignty. This is now where we have seen the state failure. Also, we have arrived to a situation of state failure. That's during this time, though that we have had elections, 4 times elections on the parliament, other all elections for the council of governors, but all that has been really without, the positive end of bringing the change into a stable and sustainable development in the country. In contrary, that we have seen the root of the corruptions extensions, the roots of sectarianism, the also extension of the militias in the whole in the system of our in the state system, not only as militias outside the security, but militias being also infiltrated inside the state institution. It is really where our new generation that been been seeing themselves as outside from all these systems and annihilations from the political and the state also. This it has really culminated the protest, culminating the anger, culminating the deprivation among people, and make the people, making themselves in a protest movement day by day. That was started in 2010, and it was after that in 2011, and until that in 2019 we have seen a new phase of this protest demonstration. That was in the spark of this the spark of this uprising began on 1st of October 2019. That was when the beginning of a big or a huge demonstration, peaceful demonstration in Baghdad, and then it was extended to other 9 provinces in the center and in south of Iraq. Then this demonstration, it was turned to be how you say open strike in and open. It was in huge in different big squares in Baghdad and other in all these cities. That was started from October 2019 until mid of 2020. That was the biggest, demonstrations, peaceful demonstrations, where the majority of these demonstrations was filled by young people from 15 till 35, and more that they composed 60% of them. They were from the under secondary school education, and 49 of them from these demonstrators were they are unemployed people. So you can see now that a new feature of this demonstration, it was filled by the young people, as it was mentioned now that 65% of our populations, they are under 35 years of age. The demonstration has started also with the key slogan, which was "We want a homeland." It was very much different from other demonstrations in 2011 until 2018. We want a homeland. It is an expression of a support incubator for the oppressed people. And the second slogan was also the main second slogan was, "I am going down to take my right." That this combination of these two slogans, the main two slogans, it has really expressed that the will of the people for the redistributing wealth, the redistribute with the redistributing wealth with the restorations of the idea of an absent or stolen homeland, as well as become a base, this also become a basic assembly need for the restoration of justice and the restoration of a human bride, a human dignity. That is the people they have missed all these 18 years. This is that's what when we speak now that all this demonstration is being put towards the dimensions of speaking the slogans of building a civil state, where we were in contrary that all these years, Iraq was, how we say it, being in, is not clear whether Iraq is built a state of a religious state or a civic state. That was not certain, not easy. Even our constitution, it was really made a confusion on this directions. Now, with our bitter experience, the young people, they have decided to speak about to build a civic state, to speak about a state of citizenship incubator for diversity. It is important now, where they have really how we say it, experience the danger of killing, the danger of being, splitted among themselves, the dangers of being, eaten by the corruptions, and especially by the elite, the political elites that they have ruled the country during these 18 years. I feel that's with this huge, with the huge demonstrations, which has included millions of people in the southern and in the central of Iraq, has made with a new awareness, a new free thinking, a new awareness, as I want to emphasize about citizenship, about citizenship that incubator for the diversity, citizenship that made the directions for equality among people, citizenship of equal opportunities, equal, it is really that's the young people with the new experience, with the new thinking that they have made, that they want to go through and to break down the system of a failure state, the system of sectarianism, the system of tribalism, the system of corruptions, the system of people divided according to their ethnicity or to their religious or to their sectarian. This is a new dimension of this, a new of this movement, though that this movement has really no leadership. It started without leadership. It started without how you say it, central leadership, or how you say it, political parties, or no, it is just a popular movement. Maybe this is also one of the what you call it, some endangering for it, but I think within the development of this movement, it has made really a big pressures on on our state institutions, especially when the government has resigned, and when the new electoral law has been adopted, and with the new electoral committee or commissions has been also established. But this is not enough. That was the starting point of that. What has behind that also the big sacrifices of these young people. More than 700 people being killed during this time, and many of them, they were really our intellectual people, the human rights defenders, the activists in the civil movement, and they are many of them with a great, how you say it, resource for our civil society movement. Unfortunately, this was during this time we have lost a wonderful people, wonderful colleagues and friends that we miss them now. But anyhow, that was not, they didn't give up. The young people, they didn't give up. When they use against them tear gas, when they use them against them fire bullets, when they use them against all brutality, many of them being abducted, or many of them being, arrested. Many of them, they have been threatened. Young people, I mean that male and women, male and female. Women, it was tremendous, a new dimensions of the protest movement in Iraq. Their role, their role, it was not just participating, not just making services in this, in all this long strike in the country, but also they participated in as a leadership for the demonstrations, or they are making medical first aid for the injuries, and they started also to be journalists, or they are making news and collecting donations for these people. I want here to emphasize that this new movement, which the new prospect for the development, when after that we are seeing a new political parties, when after COVID-19 it has how you say it, enforce the movement to stop as strike in the squares. So they started to make a new change for their organization when they start to build a new political parties away from the traditional parties. This is the change now when they also emphasize on the early elections, and the parliament, they agree on the early elections, and they emphasize on the accountability of the perpetrators, of the killers of the demonstrators. Until now, we didn't reach that. But anyhow, I feel that this I want to give just only general, how you say it, environment about these peaceful demonstrations, which has played a big role now in the country and made a new thinking, a new awareness among majority of the Iraqis.
Thank you, Hannah. It's always challenging with the time also to discuss.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Years and lots of struggles in few minutes. But we would like also to hear from other colleagues. And I think what you said also in a way summarized lots of aspects of the role of young people and the role of women in the recent demonstration. From Baghdad now, we would go to Sudan, and I would like to welcome Mohammed Farouk Salman, who is one of the prominent political leaders from the country. And Mohammed, you have been very active since decades. Since you were a student, you played a leading role in the struggles against the military coup. And after that, you were politically engaged in uniting the opposition and forming different coalitions together. And some, for example, the Forces for Freedom and Change, which now you are working also on reforming them. So it seems for you also, it's a non-ending journey. What is the current situation of non-violent struggle in Sudan now? We are talking probably about somehow a transitional movement, a transitional period, sorry. We heard Mr. Ibrahimi, we heard the theoretical framework from Dr. Veronique. We heard also the struggles in Iraq. What do you think is very special and important from the case in Sudan? It seems you're if you can hear us, Mohammed. Your camera is frozen. If you can hear us. All right, so yes.
Hi everyone, and let me sleep. Hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Please go on.
This is a problem of internet connection in Sudan. I hope.
We can hear you, and I think it's fine if
okay.
You turn off your camera. It's
actually,
fine.
my story myself, if you can look for 3 decades since 1989, Islamic Front coup. Tell many of people like me when we were just 20 years old, so young.
Mohammed, unfortunately, we cannot hear you very well.
Okay.
Can you try?
And as I am on profile, you find that just of their age being stored. Even now,
We cannot hear you very well. Your voice is cutting.
This okay now?
Yes, that's perfect now.
It is okay now?
Yes, now is better.
Okay. I'm trying to say, let me first congratulate my congratulations to Berghof for this 50 years anniversary, and I'm glad to be here with those names, my colleague and fellows from other countries, the activists and wherever. And I'm glad, I'm happy also to have myself with Mr. Al-Akhdar Ibrahim, His Excellency. I'm just telling that how you look to my profile. Actually, this reflects all of my generation people who were in 19 and 20 years old, and NIF come to the power for 30 years and rule our country. Actually, I'm not saying this is something telling a long struggle for me myself. Just it's my generation actually conflict, and other generation who you can see now, those youth and young people so active on the street, reflect the accumulation of awareness of this generation and people in a historical moment. Let me first describe this change phenomenon. It's not only Arab Spring. Many countries in Africa, in Latin America, and other countries reflect actually, I name it always, a second independence. If we look earlier, as Mr. Akhdar was talking about the slogan for the revolution in 50s about unity and socialism and other things, and these all were connected with the post-colonial state being actually done or achieved in actually limited and not completed national projects inside these countries, and the colonial itself played a big role in shaping the modern state in these countries in the middle of the last century in Africa, in Arab world and other countries. So we don't have a democratic and a national vision and people coming together to build a good firm of a modern state role in bringing good quality of life for people and doing a justice and other measurement that could sustain the government and state itself. So we have most likely, I can name it, a failed state models being trying to survive for 50 or 60 years since the independence. What we can see now in this wave or movement that actually spread among these countries like Sudan and other countries, in my opinion, this tell more than the awareness of the new leader, that which I totally agree with my colleague from Iraq, that a new actually elite is being shaping. Let us not just say it's a political party or something like this, because this is how we tried in our first independence to go and focus on the power issue directly without putting the issue of power itself, why we exercise it. And we went in a competition between all of the elite and power phrases, which make a problematic country that could never sustain a democracy in its experience in the independent countries. And this is lead us to where we are now. So I do believe that the condition of this old state is vanished. No longer, it's not valid for all countries. However you try to give them a chance to rule or to make reforms, they are not able to do this. And they went with their countries in many problems in administration, like corruption. They could not maintain peace. They could not be committed to justice. And even as the political classes, even you cannot say there was a real democratic power or democratic forces. Even the political parties are not reflecting our community interest, and they are not the good expression for having a participatory model. Election itself is not the democracy itself. The election is a feature in democracy, and it comes on the bottom of the democracy, democratic practices, that people could come to issues that they don't agree on it, to have a candidate to the power, but not the mainstream of the democracy itself. And I do believe one of the main features of the old state or the first independent state for all our people in Arab world, Sudan cannot only be considered as Arab world because of the diversity of Sudan itself. And also Sudan, we cannot say we have been in a non-violence resistant, because since our independence in 1956, we have a civil war, and up to now, not yet ended. Even after separation of Sudan in two countries, The two countries now, there is inside a civil war in South Sudan and in the Sudan itself. This is reflects that the same conditions of this failure of all the state and the problems that being in the old state is still there after being separating the country based on ethnicity, by the way, is still there in the two countries that tell it's something beyond what we are trying to understand it through. This might be a reflection of a rooted conflict inside our political mind, intellectuality, and the nationalist project that we could develop for our people, either in Sudan or in Arab world or in many countries in Africa, that we witness a lot of political changes now. There was change take place in Kenya after Daniel Arab Moi, and through a non-violence, by the way, model that used the election. This also took place in Ghana and Gabon and other countries. It was about to reach a success in Zimbabwe, if we can remember, when Shengre ran an election against Mugabe. But again, it doesn't reach for a good end, but it was a start of a big movement of a protest all around our continent in Africa. This is taking place. Let me go back to main issues that I do believe on it. We have been always in a mindset that consider and deal with the low limit or terminals or terms of surviving with each other. And this is how we look at the state itself. We don't see the state as something that should be based on a high value and a commitment to a national project, that we should look at it as something untouchable that expresses our own interests and co-live together, rather than having this higher terminal and values reflected in our political parties and in the areas that we've been divided in, either including our tribal groups and other ethnical and religious as well, to consider it as something that should divide us, not to unite us with each other. Looking at these terms and doing politics in this way without having a perspective for the state itself as a higher level and terms and concept of our coexistence, make it practicing politics is a way of dividing us, making more problem, not being able and qualified to play democracy and other things. We look at the tools or apparatus of the modern state, like army, which should serve the security and should sustain the constitution. It works other way because of this mindset. It was become, instead of an opportunity of having a sustained democracy, it was an opportunity to abuse democracy, as happened in Sudan, Egypt, and other countries, even in Iraq during Saddam Hussein, and many African countries. And this shows how the first independent and the phenomena of post-colonial state, in fact, use these artificial made modern institution by colonialism that lack the national vision and national structure inside it, or not rooted these values, how this modern constitution and institute play a very negative role. And one of the opportunities, as Mr. Akhdar Ibrahimi was telling, how we can look for the army to play a positive role in a democratic transformation. And this is issue that I want to come to it, because if we look at the non-violence movement and the protests, we can be so happy with them. We can see a lot of heroes and something that we can feel proud of that thing. But this should be developed and integrated, and not to be as it a way of dividing people and classes, because this should shape the future, should shape the values that make the state, should shape the values that should the political stage itself should be actually full and committed to the rule of the civil state, as we are always say it as a slogan in Sudan. This is revolution actually being summarized in the slogan of, I will say it in Arabic, Hurriya, Salam, Adala. In English, it is freedom, peace, and justice.
Thank you, because you mentioned also a very important challenge that usually nonviolent movement they face in a way by trying to avoid escalation. And I would like to go back and discuss this with you, but allow me now to give the floor to Diana Men'im, who's joining us from Lebanon, my home country. Diana leads Kullunaz Irada's executive team after her extensive experience with the United Nations, where she last held the position of senior economic advisor at the UN Resident Coordinator's Office in Beirut. Diana, based on your extensive economic and political experience, what are the main struggles of protest movements in Lebanon? And I would assume also lots of issues were mentioned by Hannah or by Muhammad. What do you think is very special about the Lebanese case that really needs lots of attention?
Thank you, Ramzi, and thank you, Berghof Foundation, for hosting this essential dialogue, I believe. It's indeed true. A lot of the things that Hannah and Muhammad have mentioned resonate very well, particularly on the role of women, on decentralization, on rethinking whether this decentralized and quote-unquote leaderless revolutions should now reinvent themselves into more organized and consolidated groupings. So it's really very interesting to hear this, and this resonates a lot. I think one factor that, of course, is present in Sudan and Iraq, but this is really acute in Lebanon today, is the financial and economic crisis, and is the blast that happened in August 4 in Beirut. So I'm going to start with, I mean, this is probably the biggest economic crisis that Lebanon has witnessed in its modern history. And as much as it is really disastrous for the Lebanese people, it is also a chance for people to question the economic and the political also structures that have prevailed in the country for the past 30 years. So this is definitely a huge challenge for the Lebanese people at this moment, but I also see this as an opportunity for us to engage in discussions around what is social equity. How do we bridge the acute inequality today in Lebanon? People in the streets have raised these issues. A lot of slogans centered around equality, centered around the need, centered around the right of people to have access to basic services that today only specific strata of the Lebanese have access to. So there were a lot. Definitely, I mean, and as in most of the movements, there was this huge economic and socioeconomic component. But at the same time, and this is also very telling, there is sort of a consensus that the existing political and social paradigms have failed, but until now, there is no consensus around what the alternative is. And I feel this also portrays a shift or a new phase in this revolutionary movement, where today there is a lot of focus on the development of a discourse that is, of course, inspiring, but that is also a vision that the Lebanese can own and adhere to and relate to. And this, I would say, is one of the biggest challenges today. So there is really this challenge of formulating a political and economic discourse that people can own. This is a country that has been for the past 30 years governed by parties based on that actually got their power from two things. Fear. They have exploited fear from the other sect, fear from the other communities, and that is built on clientelistic networks. These are political parties that have systematically drained the state from all its resources and have instead replaced the services that the state can offer with their own proper clientelistic networks. And this has allowed them to grab people by what hurts the most: education, healthcare, basic income. etc. So today, we really, the political groups really have, the emerging political groups really have a challenge of creating a new discourse. First of all, redefining politics, creating a discourse that is people-centered, that focuses on a rights-based approach. What are people's rights? How do we put people at the center of politics again? But also a discourse that is smart enough to understand the nuances across the different communities and to pierce through these nuances. Until now, the movement has succeeded in, of course, talking to a big chunk of the people that are living in the capital, Beirut, but there is a real challenge in going to other areas and presenting a convincing discourse in other areas. This is something that groups are totally aware of, and there's a lot of focus on this today. Together and in parallel with this, I'm sorry, I'm going to close this to reduce the noise. In parallel with this, there is also the challenge of these groups coalescing at a bare minimum around a vision that is convincing. And here, of course, we realize that there will be discrepancies in the discourses of the emerging political groups, but there needs to be clarity around 2, 3, 4, maybe focal points that all the groups coalesce around. I think that there has been progress around this axis recently. There has been, I mean, for those of you that are already in the know, there are already 2 coalitions from the opposition that have formed. So the various groupings have coalesced already into 2 distinct coalitions. The discourse is clearer there. You have many other groups that are in none of these 2 coalitions, but at least there is a drive today to organize better and to clarify the political discourse better. People today can expect at least what these coalitions are going to say on certain very important issues. And I think also there is progress in relation to the definition of what are the immediate next steps in terms of a transition. Today, a vast array of the political groups align that there is a need for a transitional government in Lebanon that is fully headed by the opposition. So this is already something that the opposition has agreed on. This is already a very good entry point for us to push towards. Yes,
Diana,
go ahead, James.
Stop you here, I think, because of the time pressure, and also you pointed out several driving factors for change that also were highlighted by Vero. But you talked a lot about what is the alternative, in a way, the importance of creating a political discourse. And here I would like to go back to Muhammad, because I think the situation in Sudan might be a little bit more advanced in comparison to Lebanon and Iraq. Muhammad, from your experience in relation to the current transitional period, what do you think could be a lessons learned to Lebanon or to Iraq? Or what do you think were the factors that made or will make this transitional period reach a successful end? Is Muhammad, are you still with us? Okay.
Yes. I unmute now.
Yes.
Hello?
Yes. Can you hear? Did you hear my question? Hannah, you heard also my question, right? And I think the situation in Iraq is a little bit maybe as complicated as in Lebanon. What do you think are the main challenges, or what is the most important aspect to focus on this transitional period? Muhammad, we will get back to you after we hear from Hannah. Hannah, please, if you can be short also, please. You have to unmute yourself as well.
It's now with this transitional period that we are living in, especially when we speak about elections and when we speak about a new, governing and a peaceful transformation of power. It is essential. But the change is the main change is not only election. the election will bring the same faces or the same, political parties, traditional political parties, under, under the militias and under the powerful of, weapons outside the government, or the security is not been functioning well. This will not be a change. So now with the political parties, with the civilian political parties, they have decided to suspend from the elections, and elections should be in October. So this is now a new phenomena of the development, that they are thinking of how to make pressures on these on the politicians for real change. Not only this, speaking about elections. Elections will not do any change. The real change that should be when they open the door for fighting against corruptions, to make accountability against the mafias of corruptions, not about the small people that they are corrupted, but the main people that they are responsible for that, and to open the file of the accountability of the perpetrators, of the killers of the peaceful demonstrators. This is also one of the very much essential now. Well, otherwise, there will be no change in this situation.
So in a way, the election is more the tool that might bring the change, but it's not the change by itself.
No.
Before I go to Muhammad, Diana, you have extensive experience with election, be it the municipal election of Beirut and the parliamentary election. And I know historically what you achieved in this movement, I think, was a breakthrough against all these traditional political parties. We know there is upcoming elections in Lebanon, and also we received a direct question to you saying, how does Kulluna Irada define itself in terms of the emergent political movements? Is it a platform to empower these alternative groups, or is a stand-alone unit that will be part of the coalition? I would just add to this question, what do you think in general, would the elections, the parliamentary elections coming soon in Lebanon actually be held? That's a big question, but would this be a chance for bringing the change that people went to the street to achieve? And please, as much as you can be short, that would be great.
No problem, I'll be brief. Ramzi, also, I think, as Hannah said, these political groups have power, and their power is consolidated not only within these institutional structures, their power is consolidated also outside these institutional structures, be it in the weapons that some of them hold, be it, as I said, in the clientelistic networks that they have, be it in the way they run the areas that they already are present and active in. So yes, elections are essential because, of course, today, the emerging political groups have to gain legitimacy, and any battle for representation will allow to increase our legitimacy. So definitely, elections are key. They're going to give a number of votes to this vision, to this proposal that we are actually carrying. But at the same time, they are not the only step. I also want to focus that it's not only parliamentary elections that are essential. We also have to focus on local elections. Municipal elections are key. And this is where, as you mentioned, Beirut Madinati was able to really pierce. Beirut Madinati ran for the municipal elections in Beirut, which is, of course, the biggest municipality in Lebanon. And this was extremely important because we could talk to people about matters that interest them in their daily lives, and could really claim back the idea of the importance of public policy, of politics, to really advance people's interests. So local elections are key, and elections in syndicates and orders are also very important. As we speak today, the politicians, the 6 key political groups in power in Lebanon have blocked for the 6th time elections in the order of engineers and architects, because they feel that there is a movement there that might actually cause a win. Student elections in universities are also essential. Any battle today for representation is essential, because also, mind you, this political class that has governed since 1990 has desertified the political landscape. They have put their grip over all of the syndicates. They have put their grip over all the student and teachers unions. They have really held their grip so tight over all of these and blocked any change, any chance for us to change and pierce through these structures. So we have to start piercing through these structures one by one. To answer the question on Kulluna Irada, yes. Kulluna Irada is an advocacy group. So we are not a political party, we are an advocacy group. This is a group that is made out of Lebanese, in Lebanon and outside Lebanon. And it is fully financed by the Lebanese. We do not take any contributions elsewhere. And these Lebanese do not have any personal interests. They have vowed not to run for office, etc. So they are only putting the resources at the service of this country and the change that we want to advance. This is why, of course, we will not be running as a standalone in the parliamentary elections. Kulluna Irada will be supporting emerging political groups that are running for the elections. We're going to be providing, we're going to be putting at their service the resources that we have from content on economic issues, on social issues, etc., because we have a huge focus on content and policy development, to support and campaigning, support and communications, media, etc. So a full range of services that will be put at the support of these political groups.
Thank you, Diana. Mohammed, I hope now your microphone is working, and I'm really interested to hear your experience in relation to elections. Also, you are working yourself on reforming kind of opposition group. You heard Hannah, you heard the challenges in Iraq, and also you heard Diana, and I think you agree with her for sure on the importance of the local elections. What is the situation right now in a couple of minutes, and how do you see the prospects of the protest movement or the aspired change in Sudan? And this would be your closing note also, because we're reaching the end of the session.
Okay, I will try and make short. Actually, Diana said most of what I would say about election, because if we talk about the failure of the old paradigm and the need for new paradigm, which is not yet shared, one of the tools that we make the new paradigm is this changing of the model of election, starting with the local and local government that should make the political mind change the doing of politics in an objective way that really can address the issues and the diversity of the rights of the people and other things. And this is a very good point. I think Diana said well. Let me come to the other tools that if we look at the protest and this movement of opposition, we should move from protest to power. And this is very important thing that the new paradigm should address it. And I think one of the main issues that we are now in Sudan focus on it is how to use through the protest movement the tools that really enhance the non-violence values. Just like, let me talk frankly, and I think Hannah talked about it, the dialogue. Actually, the protester, because of how they are loose and are not organized or institutionalized, they don't like the dialogue. They don't actually give it a credibility. And this is something we suffer from it in Sudan, King model, while we have been in a dialogue with the TMC, the military forces, and still this partnership in power make a lot of problems. The dialogue should be enhanced, and this is a message for Mr. Akhdar Ibrahimi. The old model of dialogue and mediation in the previous paradigm will not work with this new paradigm. They should adopt a new model of conversation and dialogue, actually, that not to conserve or to keep the power as it is, actually to redefine the power actor and the political class from according to the new changes. Other issue that give a credibility for the dialogue, I think the issue of justice. If we talk about the old paradigm and the violence and the actually killing that being made by the state itself, not only we can say individuals that are doing this, we need to apply a new model of transitional justice genuinely to address the failure and the crimes and the violence committed by the state, by the national state after the independence, after the colonial, because this is one of the real liability that cannot make us address the future. We cannot carry all of us or all of Sudanese liable and feeling guilty. The main issue of revolution is not to accuse people, actually to allow change, to allow a new paradigm and new discourse. So genuinely, we should be committed to the justice. We should provide our own model of transitional justice. I look to transitional justice not as something like a compromise or below the justice. It's something over it, because these crimes we are talking about committed is something above the capacity of the ordinary justice. So we need something higher. This is all the point I want to add.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you.
That's also resonates with lots of global kind of calls that there's without justice, there's no peace. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. Before I give the last remarks to my colleague, Dr. Veronique, I would like to thank again all the panelists. I'm sorry if you didn't have enough time to express everything you prepared for, but we consider this panel discussion as a kick-off of a longer discussion that's needed among different nonviolent protest movement that we hope they will become political movement, because as Mr. Ibrahimi said in the beginning, maybe now these movements, they really want to reach power, and that's what we hope for. I would like to thank all the colleagues that really made this session possible. Without their help, that weren't possible to hold this session. And now I will give Dr. Veronique the final word before we go with the final remarks from my CEO, Andrew, and Mr. Ibrahim.
Thanks, Ramzi, and thanks to our wonderful panelists. I mean, it would be unfair to try to summarize this very rich conversation now in a few minutes, but I think what I take from that discussion is on the one hand, I heard, I think, across your three contexts, how much history matters, how much the roots of post-colonial, the unfinished national project, as Mohammed was calling it, and led to a lacking national vision of how to come together, and led to an unrepresentative political class, a system of corruption, sectarianism, abuse of power, which led to the eruption of the protests that we have seen in the last 2 years. Protests aiming to build a civil state, to restore human dignity, to redefine citizenship, to fight for social equity, to fight for transitional justice, as we just heard. I think a lot of the remarks that I made earlier were echoed by what I heard about the characters of those protests being decentralized, being inclusive with women at the forefront, and facing a number of challenges in terms of strategic communication, formulating new and clear discourses, formulating a new vision of politics, coming together with new paradigms, and taking over power through election and beyond, which I think is going to be the next challenge that all of you will be facing. And I wouldn't want to finish without maybe recalling the very powerful statement that we heard at the very beginning from Mr. Brahimi and my colleague Andrew about the fact that at the end of the day, states, oppressive states, they fear nonviolent action, they fear nonviolent oppositions even more than they fear violent groups. They prefer to face armed opposition. I think it's much easier to defeat an opponent on the battleground where the asymmetry actually is even magnified. And I think this reinforces a lot of the research that has proved that non-violent movements are much more effective than violent struggles in bringing about peace and democracy. And so I wish you a lot of success on this route. I'm very happy that Berghof has made peaceful protest movements a strategic focus for his next 3 years. And so this is one of, I hope, many conversations along this topic, and I look forward to the following ones. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vero, and indeed to all our panelists. Mr. Brahimi, is there anything there you would like to make some comments on? We've received a couple of questions that I could tell you about, or do you have things that you would like to say anyway?
Let's go with the questions,
Okay.
because
Okay, one question we got from a member of Parliament in Canada, Sven Svengelman. He actually is the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Canadian Parliament, and he worked with the UN in Iraq when I was head of constitution. He's written, how important is the parallel fight for inclusion in the Arab world, i.e. making sure that the voices of women, young people, and ethnic and other minorities and marginalized groups can and will come to the table. And then another question to you, Mr. Brahimi, is about the time spent in protesting. Somebody observed that it seems that the spontaneous ones you mentioned took several weeks to succeed, or less, while the organized ones like Sudan took months. So what would seem to be the defining factor?
First of all, of course, I'm delighted that distinguished member of parliament from Canada has listened to us and is interested in what is being said. The parallel struggle for inclusion takes place in the protest movement. By being present, women and the youth are claiming, and as a matter of fact, being given their seat in the protest movement. To move from there to the table is a little bit more complicated, but I'm sure it will happen. You see, what is happening in our region mainly is that education has made a lot of progress. Perhaps it's not quality education everywhere, but there are in my very early years, there were 90% of people illiterate in Algeria. Now there are 10% illiterate people in Algeria. That makes a huge difference. Women in universities, I think in practically every single country in the world, in the Arab world, are more numerous. There are more women than men in universities. That also, in several countries, definitely in mine and in Tunisia, the justice system is feminized. Not only the education system, you have more teachers at all levels who are women than men in practically every single country. But also you have not more judges. I don't know if there is more judges that are women than men, but certainly there are a lot of judges in almost every country in the Arab world. From there, moving to the political table, as it were, is not going to take place overnight. I think Lebanon tells us how civilized, cultural society does not necessarily accept women at the political table. I think Diana will tell you when the first single woman, entered parliament, and how many women there were, say, definitely in the time of Taif. I'm not sure there was anyone. So, to move from, it's not something that's going to happen immediately. Hopefully in Lebanon. I hesitated to say anything about Lebanon because I don't know enough about it. And I was afraid that it would say something stupid. But now I'm happy that it didn't, because Diana spoke about it extremely well, much better than I could have. Now, so, the inclusion process is taking place, will certainly accelerate. How fast that will depend, that will not be the same from one country to the other. The first government that was formed in 2004 in Iraq included 6 women. The next one included 1, I think, or 2. So, this is not going to be also a linear progress. One is, of course, extremely happy to see the foreign minister of Sudan being a woman. So progress is taking place. Progress will continue, but it will be different from one Arab country. And all in all, I think it's not going to be fast. We have also a problem. We can't look the other way and ignore the fact that political Islam has become mainstream in practically every single country. And they, and then those who are not part of the political Islam, have got to really work hard to see how they can live together. You can't say that if you count only 25, 30% of the voters who vote for political Islam, you cannot throw them out. You cannot ignore them. They also cannot ignore the other 70% in the country. So I think we all have to see how we can live together. Tunisia is often said to be the place where things subsequent to the Arab Spring are doing well. It's not that easy for the Tunisians. I don't think they are making that much progress. Again, country that is not talked about who has done rather well is Morocco. The king made a deal with the political Islam, and that deal has stuck. The country is peaceful. It's not doing perfectly well, but it is peaceful. Egypt, is that's perhaps the I think I'll stop there for this first question. No, unmute.
And did you have any? Did you have anything else you'd write? Because we've actually coming up to the 6 o'clock. Do you have any other comments you'd like to make before?
Yes, perhaps since we are talking about this change that is demanded everywhere and is having difficulty to become a reality, in spite of the manifestation of the longing and the wanting of this short of violence until now. People are stopping short of violence, which is very good. But will they always, if nothing happens? Even in a country like Lebanon, where it's really admirable. But will the people, continue to just wait, just shout, beg, and stop there if there is no response to what they say? But then the protest movement have got to understand that agreeing in the streets that we want change is not enough. You've got to formulate that. You've got to formulate that. And also, not everybody in the system is, worth throwing out. There are quite a few decent people in the existing system. So how are you going to bridge that space between the good guys in the system and the masses who are, I think, we have got to accept their own good. And then those masses are composed of people who do not necessarily agree with one another. Everywhere, in every single place. In Algeria, for example, where there is an exemplary protest movement that is totally peaceful. I think no other country has been like Algeria. Every single Friday for 2 years, with millions of people in the streets. And both the demonstrators and all in all, the government, the army, the police, we are very unhappy that there are about 60 people in jail from this protest movement. I mean, look at a couple of other countries and see. I think probably less people were arrested in Algeria than in France during this Gilets jaunes demonstrations. So that's great, but we are not moving around there. I think in Lebanon you say كلكم ترحلوا كلكم مش كده or something like that. In Algeria نقول تتنحوا كاع. We will pull you out, all of you. Great. But how are you going to do it? Where are you going to start? Where is the first step of this 1,000-mile journey? So there isn't ample time for this protest movement to really move to the next stage that Diana talked about. And that is, how are we going to move from here to a working transition? I think Sudan has I think they have the satisfaction of having started a transition. Will that transition be perfect? Will it work? Great. We'll see. But at least they have started somewhere. In Lebanon, they haven't. In Algeria, they haven't. In Iraq, I don't think they have. And in Syria, they are not even talking about it. These are the things that I'm sure you will be talking about in your foundation. And hopefully the people in our streets, cities, and villages will be talking about too.
Right, yes, indeed. Thank you. I'm actually been getting a lot of questions for you, but I'm afraid we've run out of time before having got to them. But it shows the interest there was in hearing more from you on a number of issues. I'm just going to make one point overall before I close, which was that one of my questions, Mr. Brahimi, I wasn't expecting this to become a leitmotif of the meeting, but the issue of how, based on my own personal experience of Israel and Palestine, how governments clearly sometimes prefer an armed opposition, and you, Mr. Brahimi, spoke about it, and then Veronique made a strong point, making it, I think correctly, a more general issue than that. And I think that is really important. I mean, it is clearly many governments are so keen. I mean, one sees that by the speed with which governments around the world, in the Middle East in particular, but around the world, immediately tried to denigrate their opposition by accusing them of being terrorists. It's the most obvious, immediate thing. Long before any terrorism is being conducted, it's the first line of defense as well. And I think that is precisely why civil protests or non-violent protests are so rarely encouraged, and it's just so much preferable, particularly for the hardliners within any particular government, to be able to just dismiss even the most reasonable opposition as terrorists. It means that they don't want to have non-violent, peaceful, and that is such an enormous challenge for everybody, for the three movements that we've been talking to today, and in many other countries, and indeed everybody trying to help. So an enormous thanks from me to everybody who listened in, has registered and called up to join us today. To all my colleagues, and there were many of them, most visibly Veronique and Ramzi, but many others too, and our three panelists, and to you, I mean, it's more than keynote, but about you, Mr. Brahimi. Thank you so much, Diana, Mohammed, and Hannah. Really useful insights. I hope we will work again, and my warm thanks once more. Take care.